Good morning, Hope City Church.
My name is Lisa.
And my name is Dion.
We've recently joined Hope City Church and we've been having the most incredible time. Even through the lockdown, we were so warmly embraced into the Hope City family. We are blessed and privileged to be a part of this amazing body of Christ.
We welcome you to our Sunday morning service. Thank you for joining us. If you're joining us for the very first time, a special and warm welcome to you. We pray you will open your hearts and allow God to give you revelation and inspiration through His Word.
So we trust that you will stay tuned in, and let's prepare our hearts as we go into a time of worship to receive of God and His Word.
Have a blessed Sunday.
But thanks be to God, who in Christ always leads us in triumphal procession, and through us spreads the fragrance of the knowledge of Him everywhere.
a shaking, there is a stirring, there is a hunger, there is a yearning. We need your fire, burning, consuming, your holy presence, purifying. Spirit of God, would you come and ignite our hearts? Lord, would you come and shake off all that can be shaken? Lord, you are burning up all our idols. Lord, you are jealous for our love. You are removing all our distractions, bringing our hearts close to your own. Spirit of God, would you come and ignite our hearts? Lord, would you come and consume us with your presence? We behold you, glorious one. We surrender our all. Here before you with contrite hearts, Jesus, we adore you. We behold you, glorious one. We surrender our all. Here before you with contrite hearts, Jesus, we adore you. Spirit of God, would you come? 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 We behold you. Oh, Jesus, here is my heart. Come take it all, Jesus. We behold you, glorious one. We surrender our all. Here before you with contrite hearts, Jesus, we adore you. Jesus, we adore you. We long for you. Come and ignite us. Oh, would you come? And you unravel me with a melody. You surround me with a
What's up, everyone? Hope you are all keeping well. Here's a look at what's happening at Hope City this week. We have our lockdown life groups happening as per usual over Zoom on Tuesday and Wednesday nights, and one on Thursday morning for ladies only. We have our prayer evening on Thursday night at 7:30. Please be sure to join us as we come together in the presence of God and praise His mighty name. Hope Generation will be having their second meeting at the church this Friday. If you would like to join, please make sure you RSVP. And just a reminder that there is a prayer walk that is being held at Modderfontein Lake today between 2 and 3 p.m. Please join us as we unite with other believers and call on the name of Jesus. Please be sure to contact us if you would be interested in joining any of these. And now over to Glendon with this week's preach.
Good morning, Hope City Church. Today we are starting a new series. We're going to be looking at the life of one of the heroes in our faith, a guy called Moses. Now, this guy is an absolute legend. There were so many significant and important events that happened in his life as God was interacting with his chosen people, Israel, that still have symbolism and still have meaning and incredible understanding of our faith for us today. And so he's a really good guy to look at. When we look back at some of the things that happened in Moses' life, we look back and we see the first Passover in Egypt and how the Israelites painted blood around their doorpost, the blood of a sacrificed lamb, to protect themselves from the destroying angel. We look back and we see them leaving Egypt, and leaving Egypt is a picture of us leaving behind our worldly ways and our worldly habits and our slavery and our sinfulness as we turn and we follow Jesus. We look back and we see the Israelites leaving Egypt and going through the Red Sea, which is a picture of our baptism in water and it pointing to our salvation in Jesus. We look back and we see Moses going up Mount Sinai to get the law. We realize that Jesus came down to give us grace. We look back and we see the Israelites journeying through the desert towards the promised land, God's inheritance, God's favor and God's blessing at that point. And we get excited because these things have meaning for us today as well. So the context we're going to read in Exodus chapter 3 in a moment. The context is that Abraham had lived and died a good life. Then there was Isaac, and then there was Jacob, who had 12 sons, Joseph being one of them. And Joseph, you'll remember, ended up in Egypt. He was the second in command behind Pharaoh, and his brothers and his family ended up living in Egypt. They moved to Egypt because the favor and the provision of God was there. But that wasn't God's final plan, his long-term plan. There was the promised land that was still to come. And so for 400 years, the Israelites lived in Egypt. And because God's blessing was on them, they multiplied, they increased the number to such an extent that they became a threat to Pharaoh. And so he enslaved them. He put them to work, slave labor. It was difficult, it was hard, it was physical. He imposed laws where some of the Israelite babies were killed as a means of population control. And so Moses gets born into that context. And somehow his parents realize he's different and they protect him, they shield him from being killed. And then one day they float him in a boat down the little basket, down the river, past Pharaoh's daughter who's gone down to bathe. And she sees this baby and she has compassion on him and she takes this baby in and raises him as his own. And so for 40 years, Moses grows up in the royal household. He grows up in a palace. He's incredibly blessed. He's living the good life these first 40 years. And we don't know too much about those early years. Hebrews chapter 11 says this: by faith, Moses, when he'd grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than the treasures of Egypt because he was looking ahead to his reward. And one day he sees an Egyptian slave master mistreating a fellow Israelite slave. And what he does to try and get justice, he kills the Egyptian. And I don't know, sometime later, a few days later, two Israelites are having an argument, they're fighting. And he wants to step in, Moses does, and resolve the conflict. And he tries to kind of get in between them, and they say, hey, what the heck are you doing in our fight? And aren't you the guy who killed the Egyptian the other day? Moses freaks out. He realizes the cat's out the bag, the beans have been spilled, and he legs it. He leaves Egypt. And he goes and he finds a wife, marries this woman, and he becomes a shepherd. He's got a flock of sheep, and he's wandering in the desert being a shepherd until he turns 80. And then it really starts heating up for Moses. So let's read together the call of Moses, Exodus chapter 3, and I'm going to read from verse 3. Now, Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness. Candace asked me the other day, what is the far side of the wilderness? I don't know. And he came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that the bush was on fire, but it didn't burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. He's a curious guy. He's a scientist like me. When the Lord saw that he'd gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. He was also hard of hearing. That's why God had to call him twice. And Moses says, here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you're standing is holy ground. Then he said, I'm the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And at this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I've heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I'm concerned about their suffering. So I've come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites and the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I've seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go, I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. A great text. After this, Moses, if you read for the next chapter, Moses argues with God. He gives a whole lot of excuses to God about why he shouldn't take on this wonderful, privileged responsibility of leading the people out of Egypt. And he says, well, God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? And God replies, well, I, God, will be with you. And Moses says, well, when I get there, who do I say sent me? And so God gives this long rundown of how it's going to go down, how Pharaoh's going to harden his heart, and how there's going to be all kinds of signs and wonders, and eventually you'll take them out of Egypt. And then Moses says, well, how will they believe me? And so God gives him the signs. He takes his wooden staff, he throws it on the ground, becomes a snake. He picks it up, it becomes a staff again. He puts his hand in his cloak, pulls it out, it's covered in leprosy, puts it back in, takes it out, and it's healed again. He gives Moses some signs. And then Moses says, after all this, he says, well, you know what? I'm actually not very good at talking. I've got a stutter, I've got a speech impediment. And God says to him, well, you know what? I've made everything. I made man's mouth. Go and talk. I'll give you the words. Go. Moses says, well, please send someone else. At this point, the Bible says God gets angry with Moses. And it says, take your brother and go. Take your brother Aaron and go. So, Moses, what a guy. I want to just, around this text, around this call of Moses from the burning bush, I want to just ask us some questions and get us thinking and challenge our understanding around what it means to be called by God. So Moses, he saw the burning bush and he went over to it. It said he turned aside to have a look. He was curious. It got his attention. And friends, when you and I, or for you and I, when God gets our attention with something unusual, something unexpected, something out the blue, do we stop and listen? Do we turn aside and say, well, this could be God. I'm going to go check it out. How many times has God given you and I a wake-up call and we've possibly ignored it? How many times has there been an unexpected blessing from God and we've barely even stopped to thank Him, when actually these things should cause us to turn and worship Him and humble ourselves before Him in gratitude and turn back to Him? Friends, do you even know that you have a call? Do you even know? You might have heard the phrase, God has a calling for everyone, but are you convinced deep in your heart that God has a call for you? A specific call that He's designed for you? So many believers are simply that. They're believers. They believe in Jesus for their eternal salvation. In other words, when they die, they will be with God in heaven forever. They won't experience the punishment and the torture and the suffering of hell. They believe in Christ and His death on the cross for their salvation. But they don't believe that their faith has any relevance or that their faith has any impact on their life or significance for their life. They're happy to believe God for eternity, but they don't think that God should be involved and that God's got stuff for them today, in this life, on this earth. And the way that they live and the way that they make their choices and decisions don't match up with the Word of God. And you know what, friends? God promises us amazing things. He says in John chapter 15, He says, you didn't choose me, I chose you and appointed you to go and bear fruit that will last. So God has chosen us for a task. There is a purpose that we have. Paul writes, he says to the Corinthian church, no eye has seen, no ear has heard, no mind has conceived the things that God has prepared for those who love Him. Consider this question. What comes first? Purpose or design? Purpose or design? The answer is purpose. The Boeing company didn't build a jumbo jet and then try and figure out, well, what can we use this thing for? It is so heavy, it's never going to fly, but it's got wings and big engines, maybe it can fly. They didn't try and figure out its purpose after they designed and built it. No, the purpose came before it was built. Purpose always precedes design. And when God designed you and when God designed me, there was a purpose in His mind before we were born, friends. We have to be convinced of that fact, that God has a call for you and for me. Do we often come to God and have a whole lot of excuses, trying to worm our way out of His call? Some of the excuses might be real, they might be genuine, like Moses had a speech impediment. How's he going to go and talk to Pharaoh, especially if he's under pressure, etc.? And some of our hindrances might be real to what we think, or what we think are hindrances to God's call. but we use them as an excuse not to follow God, not to take up our calling. I think many of us look at our call or something that God stirred in our heart, or some task that we would love to accomplish for God. We look at this thing and we see it is so big that there's no ways that I will have the gifting or the skill or the time or the ability to be able to achieve this thing. And so we put it off. It appears to us like a mountain that we can't climb. And so we try and justify why we didn't start climbing the mountain a month ago. Well, there was this really hectic pressure at work for a few weeks, and then the kids were on holiday, and then my spouse got ill, or they had to travel somewhere for their job, and I just never got around to it. And then my granny was sick, and we so often use excuses as to why we don't follow Jesus, and why we don't take up our call, or why we don't invest in our spiritual lives. But if you look at Moses, none of those excuses held any weight with God. Now, friends, respectfully, I would say the same for us. Our excuses, our limitations are not reasons to ignore the call. They're reasons for God to demonstrate His power through us. And if God has called you, He knows your imperfections, He knows your limitations, He knows your weaknesses. And yet He still calls you and me. He knows that we're poorly equipped. He knows that we'll never do it on our own. And yet He calls us. He knows we're going to mess it up half the time. And yet He still calls us. Friends, God is convinced that all of you plus all of God can accomplish the calling for which He has in your life. Age, friends, should not be an excuse. Spiritual age or physical age, old age. Moses was 80 when he was called, and for another 40 years he led the people of Israel till he was well over 100. Youth should not be an excuse, and I'm so excited to see how our youth are gathering and started during this lockdown time. But guys like David, he was called as a teenager to be king over Israel. Mary, Jesus' mother, was called as a teenager, and an angel appeared to her. She had an incredible calling on her life. Age is not an excuse, friends. I want to note this kind of final point, is that the gospel works its way out through our call. The gospel, the good news about Jesus Christ, it works itself out through our call. What do I mean by that? Well, look at what God says to Moses. He says, I've seen my people suffering. I've heard their cry. I've got compassion on them. They're enslaved in Egypt. I don't like how they're being oppressed. And I have come down. Friends, the gospel, the good news, is the love and the compassion of a caring God who Himself comes down to rescue us. He doesn't expect us to do 100 things, to get them all right, to jump through hoops, because He knows that our best efforts are futile. But God saw our suffering. God sees our oppression and our slavery under the devil. And God Himself, Jesus Christ, comes down from heaven. And He dies on a cross to take my sin and to take your sin, to become a curse for you and me, to die in our place, to set us free from our sin, and to restore us to a relationship with our Father that leads to eternal life. It's breathtaking. It's stunning. It's singular. It's astounding. God Himself pays the price for you and me. God came down and saved us and rescued us in Jesus. And so He says this to Moses. It's like a foreshadowing of the gospel. I've seen the suffering, and I'm going to come down and bring my people into freedom. And then He says, now you, Moses, now you go to Pharaoh. I've come down to save them, but you got to go to Pharaoh. It's amazing how God always planned for the kingdom of heaven to come to earth in a partnership between man and God. It's a beautiful thing. It's an incredible thing. And so our calling, friends, no matter what it looks like, the detail, our calling always involves the fact that God's come down, but through us, through me and through you, He rescues people. And what we're to do, we're to help people get out of Egypt, to help them get free from slavery, free from their old life, free from their sin, free from their old habits, etc. Egypt being a spiritual picture of bondage and slavery and suffering under Pharaoh. And our goal is not just to get them out of Egypt, not just to see people born again and saved, but to get them into the promised land, the land flowing with milk and honey, where God's favor and blessing is there in abundance. And so what Moses did in the physical, take the people of God out of Egypt, through a desert, through the Red Sea, into the promised land, that's our calling in a spiritual sense. We're to see the unsaved, those who don't yet know God, as like people under slavery in Egypt. And we've got to get them out. Take them through the waters of baptism. And then help to get them into the promised land and help them to find the calling that God has for them in their lives. This is the gospel working itself out through our call. We see the gospel in Moses' life. Amazing, amazing picture. So ask yourself this: what has God called you to? Do you even know what God has called you to? And what are you doing about it? Are you ignoring the burning bushes that God is placing along the path of your life, along the journey of your life? Are you ignoring the signposts that He's putting up there to get your attention? Or are you standing there arguing with God, throwing out excuses of why you could have, should have, would have, if only this had been different, then I would have done that? Friends, I can guarantee you now, I and you will lose every argument we ever have with God. And every excuse will sound so lame in His presence when we bring it to Him. Or are we letting this gospel live itself out through our lives as we follow Jesus in obedience? Friends, it's an incredible thing what God can do through one person who is surrendered, who's humbled, who's yielded, who's obedient, who's keeping in step with God. You look at what Moses did, what God did through Moses. And friends, we should long for those kinds of things to happen in a spiritual sense in our lives today. So thank you for joining us on this very first adventure with Moses, how to live like a hero, Moses style. We trust that if you're not connected in with one of our life groups, that you would get hold of us, connect with us, and we can link you in with one of those. And I pray for you this week that God would have His hand on you, that you would grow closer to God. You know that Moses was described as a friend of God. There were only a couple of people in the whole Bible who God used that title of them. So I pray for you that your relationship and intimacy with God would grow deeper and deeper and closer as you follow Him. Be blessed, have an amazing week, and we'll see you at the prayer walk this afternoon. Cheers.
Thanks so much for joining us for our online church service. If you would like to find out more about us, check out our website, Facebook, or Instagram page. Also be sure to follow us to keep in the loop with our upcoming events. If you would like to give into what God is doing through Hope City Church, here are our banking details. And if you've joined us for the first time, please contact us via email or WhatsApp. We would love to hear from you. Have a blessed week and be sure to join us again next Sunday.